working persons. My name is Kyle, and welcome back to another episode of Wednesday Whimsy. It's Wednesday, so that's the best day for it. I was out last week, and I need to close the door because you can see my toilet. Now, I don't want you to see that. As I was saying, I was out last week. I had an unfortunate event. My basement ended up flooding and destroying lots of games and my car and my floor and lots of other things. So that's not the best way to do it. Moral of the story is that indoor pools are great, but only if they are intentional. So anyway, I did take last week off, and I am upstairs in my home office right now because my basement's still a bit of a mess. Hopefully things will be back to normal soon, and we can move back down there again. But for now, we're here. It's Wednesday, and it's time to talk about some great game-related topics. If this is your first time joining us, Wednesday Whimsy is a show that I do almost every Wednesday. It's about a 20-minute show, 20 to 30 minutes, where we talk about a game or a top 10 list or some other board game topic, something that's been on my mind. So today we're talking about a game that's actually a couple years older. If I look it up, it probably came around 2019-ish is when it came out. The game is called, oops, I've got a bunch of stuff in this box. The game is called Villagers. I'll show you the box in a minute once I empty it out of things that I had brought to show us. But Villagers is a game. Let me see if I can pull up a picture. That might be a little bit better. So here we have a picture. There you go. Villagers is a game that came out in 2019-ish. It was through a Kickstarter. I was not part of the Kickstarter. I ended up buying it after the fact because it got some pretty good or interesting reviews. It is a game in which, what you're doing is you're building up a village, and the village is made up of a variety of different cards. You've got different roles and things that can go on in a village, kind of think old worldy type village, lots of handicrafts, that kind of thing. Here we have a spooner. Wonder what he's like in bed. Here we have, a swineherd. Lots of different characters. And what you're really doing, though, is you're building a lot of different combos. Each card has a bunch of, not really different uses, but kind of. I'll get into that in just a moment. But what you're trying to do is make a village in which you're going to get the most money. There are two main scorings, although there's a third scoring through one of the small expansions. You can score straight points. For example, if this card is in your village at a scoring, it'll be worth 20 points. That's that big 20 right there. Or you can score based upon other factors. There's lots of scoring conditions. And so what you're doing is drafting a hand of cards, playing those cards, and trying to score them the best you possibly can. So let's talk a little bit more in depth about how Villagers really works. So, and I do apologize that the rules in this game are a little bit, they're not hard rules, right? And here's some pictures of it. They're just a little wonky in sort of a couple of things, but I'll do my best to try and explain it to you. The game is going to take an indeterminate number of rounds, but that number is usually 5 or 6. You have this thing called the road, which is an area of cards. It's sort of a line of cards that you're going to be drafting from. It looks like these are in German. And once there are piles above the road, and once those piles are emptied out, eventually it's going to trigger a scoring. There's a scoring card under the second pile and under the sixth pile, and each pile has a number of cards equal to the number of players. So on your turn, there's really two phases. The first is the drafting phase, and in that drafting phase, you're going to be taking a card from this row of cards on your turn. And you can take any cards you want. There's no cost for taking the cards. And the number of cards you get to take is equal to 2 plus the number of food that you have. And I'm seeing, here's an example of a card with a food symbol. It's this red symbol that looks like a dinner plate. So if you have more of those, you'll be able to take more cards from the row. So you're going to take between 2 and 5. You really can't take more than 5 cards on a round. That's just a hard limit in the rules. And so one at a time, you're going to draft and then refill, and draft and refill until everyone has taken the appropriate number of cards that they're entitled to. Then you're going to you're going to refresh the row. Some cards are going to get coins on them, cards that didn't get taken. And if you take those cards, you get those coins. Coins are your score. That's a good thing to do. After everyone's done with their drafting, you're going to have a build phase. And just like in drafting, you've got a certain number of builds, and the number of builds you have is equal to 2 plus the number of build symbols you have. And here's an example of a build symbol. It's this house-looking thing there. And again, you can build between 2 and up to a maximum of 5 cards total. And the way you build a card is you simply play it in front of you. See, the cards come in a couple of different varieties. There's different suits. There's hay, there's grain, there's ore, there's wood, and there's grape. Those are the base game symbols. And then if you play with more players, there's leather and cloth, I think. And there are basic villagers, and then there are more advanced villagers. And so each of the villagers has a different production chain on it. I don't know if you can really see this because it's backwards and at a strange angle. But for example, this milkmaid, first you'd have to have a hair, and then you could play on top of that a grazer, and then, only then, can you play the milkmaid. So you're going to have to kind of look at these cards and think, okay, as you're drafting, you're thinking, okay, do I want that card? And if the answer is yes, am I able to play it? Is there going to be a circumstance where I have the right chain so that I can eventually play that card? Each card you play counts as one of your builds, except these basic villagers. You see these ones over here kind of in the corner. Those don't count as a build. You can buy them by discarding cards, and you don't discard them to the discard pile. You put them back on top of those stacks, so you'll be elongating the game by a few turns, a few draws, by doing that. And then these basic cards, they're the start ones. They're the ones that are going to start every production chain. Like this hair, it was the first one in that other production chain I mentioned, but all of the hay suit productions are going to start with a hair. And you'll actually see that these basic villagers, they have room for 2, so you can build 2 separate chains off of the villager. And so you're going to go around until everyone's played the number of productions that they're entitled to. But there's another kind of interesting feature that goes on here, and that is locks. And so I apparently didn't choose any that have some, but for example, you can see, well, here's one. This card here, it has this little Cooper here. It says Cooper with a lock next to it. And that means when you play it, you've got to pay 2 of your own coins to the owner of the Cooper. And you don't have to pay them to that person. Instead, they're going to go on top of the card for that Cooper, and then that's going to make the card worth 2 extra points. So by playing these ones with a key ring early on, you're going to be able to get coins every time somebody will need to skip that or to use that card's technology to unlock another one. Now, if that card doesn't exist in the game, if no one's played a Cooper, well, then you just pay the 2 coins to the bank. And so by getting these chains, so you've got the production chain, right? You're going to get bigger and better cards the farther you go along. But also by kind of choosing the cards that are going to have key rings on them, you might be able to get additional points, especially if you get it early on and if it's a card that everybody needs. Like, for example, this brewer, it's only ever needed for 2 different cards. So it might not be as valuable as, say, the blacksmith, which I think can unlock 8 cards. So you got to kind of keep that in mind. And so you're going to go around, you're going to play all the cards you're able to play, and then you're going to start a new round. And after a couple of rounds, there's going to be the first scoring. And in the first scoring, you're just scoring the value of all the cards, including any coins that are on top of them. And then you're going to keep going until the final round, the final stack. When it's empty, there's another market phase. That's the name of the scoring. And in that phase, you're going to score the final points. You'll score all of the gold points again, coins on top of the card again, and you'll also score any of the silver coins, which are sort of end game scoring conditions, like the one that I showed you earlier. This one says you get 3 coins for every 2 cowboy hat icons that you have. So you'll see this one already has 1 cowboy hat icon. So if you have another cowboy hat icon, well, hey, that's gonna net you 3 points. And so you can kind of focus on that and have a really powerful end game scoring as well if that's what you want to do. It's really not that hard. It's kind of it kind of feels like a multi-use card game, but not quite, because the cards are really only used for one thing. Although you do discard them to get the basic villagers as well, so that's, I guess, a second use. And then, having them out at the right time. The timing is everything here, because if you can get them out at the right time, you'll be able to get more points from them as other people make use of them later. So that's kind of the game in a nutshell. Let's talk about some things that make the game special. So one thing I really like about Villagers is it's really very straightforward to play, right? It's draft a certain number of cards, play a certain number of cards, and watch out for these prerequisites. Very easy to teach and learn. Now, we'll talk about this in a moment. Some of the rules are not as intuitive as you might think that they are. But sort of the core mechanisms of playing these cards, building these chains, they feel natural, they feel intuitive, and they're just generally quite fun. So that's one thing that makes the game special. The artwork is cute. It's kind of happy. I think the Board Game Geek description says that it's adorable. Whatever. I mean, I think it's sort of a happy aesthetic that's going here. There are people that kind of look like they came from a village, so they all kind of have their own personality. I think that's quite nice. It's also a pretty compact game. I'll show you here. This is the whole box. I have the expansion and I have everything sleeved, and all of the cards fit into the box. I won't say nicely, but they do fit in, and so you can easily travel with it. It's not a very large game. Small sort of storage footprint. When you set it up, though, it does take up a lot of space, so you got to think about that as well. It's also pretty fast. It's going to be 5 or 6 rounds every time. The rounds are lightning fast. It's drafting at most 5 cards, playing at most 5 cards, and you move on. Your turns are super fast. It's a very easy game to get into and play, and especially with lower player counts, it's just a lot of fun. Not any high heavy stakes on it, but generally a fun one that you can have a good time with and do something that feels a little bit different. Another thing that's kind of special about it is that you're always feeling like you're more clever than you are, right? I mean, you can see all the cards give you all the information you're ever going to need. And so you can, when a plan comes together, when you get that grape card that gives you the 14 points and you're able to get all of the ones in between it, or use a special card that lets you skip something or reuse something, you really feel very clever. Now, I mean, are you? Probably not, right? It's just a game, and you're kind of playing the most opportune things that come to your hand, but it really feels like you're doing something special, and I like that feeling. I like it when a game makes me feel like I'm smarter than I actually am. So that's kind of what we've got there. So a lot of good special things about the game. It also just doesn't feel like anything else. There's not really another game that has the same type of production chain building, the same type of combos, the same type of unlocking. It feels really good. And I also really like that unlock rule, right? You're not dependent on somebody else to play a card so that you can finally start your chain, like in Oh My Goods, for example, where you kind of really need everything to be all set up. In this game, you can always pay 2 coins and just resolve that issue. Pretty easy. It's 2 points, but usually you're going to do better by moving past that. Anyway, those are some things that I think make the game really feel kind of special. So let's talk now about the but, right? The things that I like a little bit less about the game. The first one I'm going to say is the rules. Now, I mentioned it's easy to learn, but there are a lot of things in the game that are counterintuitive. For example, when you refill the card row, you draw from one type of pile, except at the end of the round where you draw from a reserve pile. And that, it's very easy to mess that up, and that'll affect the timing of the game. So you got to make sure you get it right. Also, when you draft cards, you don't put them in your hand. You're supposed to put them on this tile that sits on the table and just kind of holds them. And you'd think, well, why is that important? Well, that's how you keep track of how many cards you've drafted, because everyone's going to be drafting 2, but some people are going to be drafting up to 5. And if you don't keep track of them, well, then it's easy to lose track and cheat accidentally or not take enough. But that doesn't feel natural. Similarly, you're supposed to do that with your builds. You're supposed to lay them all out. I find that one to be less important just because the order doesn't really matter as long as you don't exceed your overall maximum. But some of those things feel a little bit counterintuitive. And because of that, they kind of ding the game a little bit. It's also just the rules are not always as clear as they could be about what's happening when. And so sometimes, you have to look them up again, and they're not really organized the best way possible. So I wish that for a game that's as simple as this, the rules had been a little bit tighter. There are still, even though I've played it lots of times, a couple of times where I'm not quite sure how something's going to work and I've got to look it up. I also say there's a solo variant. In fact, now that I have the expansion, there are 2 solo variants, and neither is very satisfying. The first one, the original one, is the Countess solo variant, where you're playing against this character who's just randomly drawing cards, and if that character's lucky, you're going to lose, and if that character's unlucky, you're going to win. And there's all these wild events that happen, but the timing on them isn't particularly clear. I found that solo mode to be disappointing and really not worth the effort. And then there's the new in the expansion, the Monastery solo mode, where you just play and try and get a high score, which is equally unsatisfying. I think this one is not a great solo experience, which is sad. It seems like the kind of game that would be. And I've played it solo many times. I just don't know that I've ever come away from a solo game and thought, wow, that was amazing. So, those are some things. Also, it takes up a real lot of space. I told you it was in a small box, but once you spread the thing out across the table, if you've got 2 people or 3 or 4, it's really, I can show this picture again, right? We've got, this is just, this is just, it looks like the main kind of play area and 2 people's beginning of the game. They're just in round 2. And once you've got all these cards out, it's just really kind of a mess to keep track of. That makes scoring a little bit difficult, but it also makes it difficult to find a place to play. And then if you're playing with more than 2 players, no one's going to be able to see the cards that are on the table, which is really unfortunate. One other thing, and it's something I really don't like, I hate it when this happens, is that there are 2 suits in the game, or 3 in the expansion, that you can only play if you're playing with higher player counts. And so, not only do you have to then sort them all out if you are playing with the wrong number, but there's just a bunch of interactions you're not going to be able to have if you're the kind of person who wants to play this with smaller groups. And just due to the table space issue, that's the best way to play it. So that's unfortunate. And the final thing, and this is, it's a design choice. It's in the rule book, and it says, look, sometimes this happens. But the game, because it's all cards, can feel kind of random. It's very possible that you can get the fromager, the cheese salesman, and the milkmaid, but never get that grazer card. You just never get the second or the third piece in your chain. And so you've got cards that you drafted early in the game that kind of sit there and never do you any good. Now, the rules say if that's happening, pivot, right? Do something else. And that's really what you have to do. But it can feel a little bit unsatisfying if you're unable to complete your plan just because the right card never showed up, or even worse, because it showed up and somebody else took it away from you. So, that's part of the game, but it really can feel kind of lucky. And there are so many cards in the game that you're never going to see that it's very likely that even if there's 2 or 3 copies of each card, it's possible you might just never get what you need to make your ideal plan work. And so then you're going to be kind of dealing with plan B. Anyway, those are the things that I like a little bit less about the game. Let's talk now about my final rating. So I really enjoy this game. I think it's a lot of fun. It's very simple. It's much simpler than the other games I usually talk of. And one of the reasons I have it is because it was small, and since I'm not able to use my game room, I was just looking for something I could take upstairs and play. And this really fit the bill. And I just really rediscovered how much I enjoy the game. I would probably, on a bad day, if I just had a terrible game, give it a 7 out of 10. But most days I'm going to give it an 8. It's a game that I'm always really interested in trying. It never outstays its welcome. It's never very long, And so it's one that I can set up, play, have a great time, put away, and be done with, and then come back to again sometime soon. One that I always enjoy. It's a card game like nothing else. It looks good and it's a lot of fun. One that I really do recommend. I mean, you don't have to go out and buy it, but definitely give it a try if you happen to see it at a library or a friend's house or anywhere else you might be. I think you'll have a good time with it. So anyway, that's my rating on Villagers, 8 out of 10, and that's another episode of Wednesday Whimsy in the books. Thank you for joining me this week. I hope that we'll be able to do it again next week at 7 o'clock. I sure plan on it. Don't know what I'm talking about yet, but I'm sure it'll be fun. Have a great week. Go out there and play some great games. And I've been Kyle. I still am, and I will I will see you next Wednesday.